Welcome. Today we're going to be looking at birds that you might find in a typical desert backyard. And I hope you have a lot of questions, and I'll stick around at the end as long as it takes to answer all of them. And like TJ said, you can type those into the Q&A at any time that you want. And I also put my email address up on the chat. So if you wanted to contact me after the talk for any reason, that's the best way to get a hold of me. Maybe you have some questions about bird feeding or want to send me photos of birds or bugs or things like that to identify. I'll be glad to help you out. And also, if any of you want to become a member of our Desert Cities Bird Club, you can also email me and let me know that. And then I can also tell you how to get the Palms to Pines Birding and Nature Trail Guide for $1 and a guide to birds in your backyard here in the desert. These are $8 if you're interested. Just email me and we'll talk from there. But anyway, let's get to the birds and talk birds. See if I can get this to wake up. There we go. So the birds I'm going to show you are all birds that you might find in your yard if you live around here in the desert. And again, I want to thank my good friend Steve Myers of Moreno Valley for a lot of these photos. So the first bird on our list here is the Gambel's quail. Note the spelling of Gambel. It's named after a fellow named William Gambel. It's not like the casino kind of gambling. But this is the species that you will find on the desert floor. I've got a bunch in my backyard. I live in Palm Desert, just down the road from the living desert. Notice the reddish cap, which will help distinguish it from the California quail, which is our state bird, which you'll find just up the slopes in places like Pigeon, Pines, and even in the Indian Canyons, you might find some California quail. So Gambel's quail. They have chicks this time of year too. I've seen a bunch already. The Cooper's hawk is a year-round resident like the Gambel's quail that you will find swooping through your backyards and terrorizing your bird feeders and especially your mourning doves, which they like to eat. So this is a relatively small hawk. It's very maneuverable in tight spaces, and that's why it's comfortable in our backyards. The larger hawks I'm going to show you hunt more out in the open areas, not so much in our backyards. But anyway, the Cooper's hawk is a year-round resident. We also get some that migrate here in the winter, so the numbers of them do go up in the winter, but we've always got some around. And they make a big, huge nest, usually in a tall tree. A little bit bigger than the Cooper's hawk is the red-shouldered hawk. These hawks prefer eucalyptus trees if they're available, or date palms, groves of date palms. So if you live near any of those trees, you might have red-shouldered hawks around. We see them on the College of the Desert campus where I work. We see them over at Sunnylands in Rancho Mirage, which has a lot of eucalyptus trees. But anyway, they're a medium-sized hawk, a little bit smaller than a red-tailed hawk, and note the white and black banding in the tail. So they're fairly common year-round residents. Another year-round resident of the valley of the desert is the red-tailed hawk. So these ones you'll see in the really open areas, especially as you get towards the Interstate 10. They like to perch on the power poles, not the power lines. The other two hawks I just showed you will perch on power lines. These guys perch on the poles only. And they like to hunt the larger prey like jackrabbits, ground squirrels, and cottontails in particular, the red-tailed hawks. So they're year-round residents, but there also are some that come here to winter as well. The American kestrel is actually a type of falcon. It used to be called the sparrow hawk. but it's not a hawk, it's a falcon. It's got more pointy wings than your typical hawk. It's the smallest of all of our falcons, and they can hover, which is what this one's doing here on the left. And they hunt smaller prey, mice, and even dragonflies, and crickets and grasshoppers. So they'll eat a lot of large insects and occasionally take a small bird like a sparrow or a warbler. And they're year-round residents. They nest in holes and cavities. If you hang a kestrel box up, you might entice one to move into your yard. And they also might nest in unpruned palm trees. Another reason to leave those palm trees alone. And they're great to have around, again, because they're constantly on pest patrol. They're here year-round, and in the winter, just like the other two hawks, or the other three hawks I mentioned, more will arrive to winter with us in the winter. Moving on to a shorebird, this is the killdeer. Killdeers are year-round residents, primarily winter residents, but some of them stick around throughout the summer. And they lay their eggs on the ground. You can actually see some eggs down here if you look closely. Those aren't rocks. They blend right in, but they'll lay their eggs right on the ground inside the gravel. If you happen to have a gravel driveway or there's a gravel road near you, you might see a killdeer actually nesting right in the middle of the road. They're easily identified by these two black bands on their chest, and they've got a pretty loud call. Killdeer is what they say, and sometimes you'll hear it in the middle of the night too if you live near a storm channel or a golf course with lots of grass. Now, most of the gulls that occur in the desert are just here in the winter, and they go to places like the Salton Sea, and they should have left by now, heading north. The ringbill gull, however, is the most common of all these different gulls, and the most likely one to see flying over your house at any given time. If you get a closer look at it, you'll see it's a fairly small gull, small to medium size. It's very light on the back, light gray, and it does have a black ring that goes all the way around the bill. This gull takes 3 years to reach its adult plumage. Other gulls take either 2 or 4 years. That's the ring-billed gull. This bird is not native to the area, but of course we do have them. They kind of follow humans wherever they go. They're called rock doves or rock pigeons, depending on which book you have. And they're a member of the dove family, of course, and they're here year-round. And they come in all kinds of colors. There's not just one look that they have. If you've got a lot of these in your yard, then you're probably not planting enough native plants. So we need to talk. The mourning dove, which is the official city bird of Palm Desert, is probably our most common bird in the Coachella Valley, right up there with the house finch. But it's everywhere, super abundant. They'll nest any time of the year, multiple times per year. Their nests are one of the sloppiest assemblages of sticks you've ever seen, and the eggs frequently fall out of the nests. But anyway, they're super common. They got some black spots on the wing to help you identify them, and a distinctive call. It goes like this. Sounds like they're in mourning. Now, the new dove in town, watch for this one, is the Eurasian Collared-Dove. This is a non-native species, like the rock pigeon. Now, they've been around the US for decades, but in recent times, the last 10 years in particular, their numbers have just exploded across the United States and Canada. So they really are taking over. They're bigger than a mourning dove. They're lighter in color overall, almost an ivory color. And they've got a very distinct black half collar on the back of their neck, the Eurasian Collared-Dove. They're quite aggressive, and there's some concern that they might push out mourning doves and ground doves and some of our native species. So it's not a bird we want to encourage. but they seem to be here to stay. So watch for them. In the summer only, usually, we get white-winged doves. So they start arriving in April, maybe late March. They winter in Mexico, and they spend the summer with us. And here's what they sound like. They say, "Who cooks for you?" So listen for that. White-winged dove, they got a big white patch in the wing, and even when they're perched, you can see part of that white. Some of them are starting to winter here and spend the whole year with us. So we do have a small population that never leaves, but mostly they're a summer resident. The common ground dove really needs to be renamed. Let's call it the uncommon to rare ground dove, because they're not common, at least not anymore. They used to be more common. Their numbers seem to be down, though, especially here in the Coachella Valley. They're very small doves. They look like baby mourning doves, but they're not. They're full grown. So if you see something that looks like a mini mourning dove with a shorter tail, look more closely and you'll probably see some scaling on it. And then when it takes flight, you'll see a little bit of reddish, rusty red in the wings. And they're almost always in pairs. So you'll see the male and the female on the ground, kind of hiding under the bushes. They're very shy birds. So when other birds are out in the open, these guys are usually off to the sides, kind of hiding, but not common. If you see them, you should definitely report them to ebird.org. That's where I report all of my bird sightings. That way we can find out if they really are declining or not. They're year-round residents. Another year-round resident is the greater roadrunner. You can't have a talk on desert birds without talking about roadrunners. I could probably give a whole lecture just on this bird, but I'll just tell you a few things about it. They're members of the cuckoo family. They can fly, but they prefer to run. And when they do fly, it's usually for short distances. But sometimes you'll see them up on your roof or in a tree, and they do fly up there. Their top speed on the ground is 18 miles an hour. They have some unusual feet. Can't quite see it here, but they have 2 toes pointing forward and 2 toes going backward, kind of like a woodpecker. They call that a zygodactyl arrangement. But that helps them run faster and distribute the weight more evenly. So when you see their track in the dirt or in the sand, it looks kind of like a big X. They're predators. They eat a lot of meat. They'll eat lizards and snakes, but they'll also eat baby birds, eggs, baby quail, hummingbirds that they'll snatch out of midair. So other birds are not fond of roadrunners because they're usually up to no good. But they're fun to have around, fun to see, and certainly a symbol of the desert. There is a lesser roadrunner that you can see in places like Ecuador, and that's why ours is called the greater roadrunner. They are year-round residents, although in the winter, we seem to see them less often. They do not migrate, so they must be kind of hunkering down or just being less active, less noticeable. We've got some owls here in the desert that are permanent residents, and one of those is the barn owl. The barn owl is actually in its own family, different from other owls, partly due to this heart-shaped facial disc, and also its call, which is a kind of a screeching that doesn't sound like an owl at all. It sounds more like a person in distress. So in the middle of the night, if you hear some screeching, it might just be a barn owl flying around. They're great to have around, though, because they eat a lot of rats and mice and can eat a number of rats or mice in a single night. So they're always on rodent patrol, and definitely a bird we want to encourage, the barn owl. The other common owl that's here year-round that you might hear hooting any time of the year is the great horned owl. Now, these aren't actually horns. They're just feathers sticking up. Those aren't even ears. They're just decorative feathers. The ears are actually located behind the facial discs. And in owls, one of the ears is slightly higher than the other ear. And that gives them better hearing for zeroing in on their prey at night when they can't really see it. Anyway, this is the great horned owl. You'll usually hear them, though, calling in January, February, and March. Those are the most common months to hear them in the middle of the night. It's usually 5 hoots. It goes like this. So a little bit of pause in between. The female great horned owl makes some weird screeching, almost screeching like noises that are very different than the male. So if you hear some odd owl sounds at night that aren't barn owls and not the typical great horned owl, it's probably the female great horned owl. They nest in large trees, eucalyptus, when they're available, or on top of a cliff, rocky cliff. And they'll use nests and share, they'll kind of occupy nests that red-tailed hawks or Cooper's hawks might use in other years. Also good to have around. The lesser nighthawk is only a summer resident, so they've just arrived a few weeks ago. They winter down in Mexico, mostly, and they start arriving usually in April, and they'll spend the whole summer with us eating bugs. And they fly around at night with their mouths wide open like this, and the bugs just go in by the dozens. So just like bats, there's something we want to have on a regular basis flying around our yards. You'll sometimes see them attracted to lights in parking lots, places like Costco, for example, or maybe College of the Desert or the library when it's open at night. Wherever you might find lights at night, maybe the Indian Wells Tennis Garden, you'll want to look for lesser nighthawks. Another bird that's on bug patrol 24/7, well, almost, is the white-throated swift. So these guys eat nothing but insects, and they fly around with their little mouths open and just gobble up the mosquitoes and flies and other bugs that they can find. They spend almost their entire day on the wing, rarely coming to rest. At the end of the day, they'll finally just cling on to the side of a cliff like this one's doing and crawl into a little hole where they nest or roost. But the rest of the day is spent entirely on the wing. They can even sleep and take little naps on the wing. Amazing. The white-throated swift. So they are year-round residents, although we don't see them very often in the winter, because when the temperatures get cold, the bug population goes down and the swifts take a break. They go into a temporary hibernation-like state, which is called torpor, T-O-R-P-O-R. Hummingbirds also do this to save energy at night. There's 2 hummingbird species you really need to get to know because they're here all year round. And so if you feed hummingbirds or watch hummingbirds, you'll want to know what you're seeing. One of the common hummingbirds around the desert and our yards is the Anis hummingbird. The male is the one with the throat colors. This is called a gorget. And in the Anis hummingbird, it's kind of a reddish, kind of a wine red color. Just sticks out a little bit, but not too much. They also kind of have a greenish wash on the belly here. The female, I don't have a picture of her here, but she would have mostly a plain throat with just a little bit of red speckling in the middle of the throat. The Costa hummingbird, which is just a 1/4 inch smaller than the Anis hummingbird, so they're essentially the same size. The male has a purple throat or gorget, and notice how it extends out quite a ways, unlike the Anis. So that's another clue that it's a Costas, and it's also kind of a deep purple, kind of a grape purple color instead of that reddish color. Here's a female Costas here. Note her throat is very plain, with just some very light spotting. But again, if this was an Anis hummingbird female, there would be some noticeable red flecks here and maybe even a little bit of a red blotch right in the center. But this is a Costas. And also notice how clean and white her belly is. An Anis, again, has more of a greenish wash. Anyway, this is the Costas hummingbird, probably the most common hummingbird in our yards. In my yard, again, in Palm Desert, I have 99% Costas and 1% Annas. They're year-round residents, but there also are migratory Costas and Annas hummingbirds that come and go. So numbers do fluctuate, but there's always some around all year. The rufous hummingbird, on the other hand, is purely a migrant. It moves through our valley in spring and fall. So March and April, and maybe even the first few days of May, like we're in right now, you could see a rufous hummingbird passing through. They're all heading north. They spend the winter south of the border, and they're heading north to, say, the High Sierra. Some of them go all the way to Southeast Alaska. So they can fly thousands of miles in a year on migration. And they'll stop at our yards if you've got native plants blooming or have hummingbird feeders. You'll probably get a rufous hummingbird or two each spring and each fall. And you'll notice them because they're very aggressive, they're very noisy, they tend to scare away your other hummingbirds temporarily. So if you hear kind of a ruckus going on at your hummingbird feeder, look out your window and you'll probably see a bright orange hummingbird out there, and that's the rufous who just showed up. If you feed hummingbirds, by the way, don't use the red dye. Keep your feeders clean. Change them at least once a week or more often if needed. And use a ratio of 4 parts hot water to 1 part sugar. So that's 4 cups of water for every 1 cup of white sugar. Don't use honey or brown sugar or anything like that. In the summer, which is now, or we're almost in summer, but in April, the black-chinned hummingbirds start arriving, and they'll spend the summer with us in small numbers. They're not very common in the Coachella Valley, but you might get lucky and have one at your feeder, so keep an eye out for them. They've got a really clean-cut throat here, or gorget, that doesn't extend out at all. And only the lower part of it is kind of this bluish purple, and the upper part is black on what's called the chin. So that's why they're called black chin hummingbirds. So it's kind of a half and half situation. Again, if this was a Costa's, the purple would be even a deeper purple than this, more of a grape purple. It would be entirely purple, not half and half, and it would extend out quite a ways, very noticeably. So again, look for a clean cut. This is a male hummingbird, and you might have a black chin. And start watching for them in April up through September. I've had them in my yard 1 time. They seem to be a little more common at the east end of the valley, especially over towards Indio for some reason. People often ask, do we have woodpeckers in the desert? And the answer is yes, we do. And this is our resident woodpecker. It's here year round. The male ladder-backed woodpecker has a red cap, red head. The female does not. There's no red at all. Just a male and a female. And the ladder goes all the way up the back on the ladder-backed woodpecker. So this is our year-round woodpecker. We don't have a lot of trees. Well, normally the desert doesn't have a lot of trees. And that's one of the reasons we don't have a lot of woodpeckers. But since we planted a lot of trees in our yards, they do show up. The other woodpecker that we have, but only half of the year, is the flicker. So they're snowbirds. They only come here for the winter. And it's an unusual woodpecker in that you'll see them hopping around on the grass. All the other woodpeckers stick to the trees. But these guys are comfortable on the ground, and they feed on ants quite a bit, which explains why they're often hopping on the ground, feasting on ants in an anthill. So you might see them hopping around the lawn with a robin or a blackbird during the winter. Now they're gone, and they've headed up the slopes to nest in a pine forest somewhere, or they've flown north to the Sierras or the Cascades or some pine forest in the western United States. And that's where they'll nest. And they'll be back around October. Northern flicker. Flycatchers. The black Phoebe is a very common year-round flycatcher. Almost every backyard has one. especially if there's any kind of water nearby, like a swimming pool or a little pond or even a dog dish might be enough to attract a black Phoebe. But they're always near water of some kind, perched nearby, waiting for a fly to fly by so they can sally forth and snatch it. So watch for them, the black Phoebe. The very close cousin to the black Phoebe is the Say's Phoebe, S-A-Y''S. And these guys are also year-round residents, but they're not attracted to water like the black Phoebe is. So you'll see them in drier areas. You'll see them in vacant lots, out in the open fields, not necessarily near the water. And they're also much lighter in color compared to the black Phoebe, more of a gray with a little bit of black in the tail, and then this kind of burnt orange color below. Say's Phoebe. They'll sometimes nest on top of your porch light. Another flycatcher that's slowly becoming a year-round resident is the Vermilion Flycatcher. Now, most of them are here in the winter only, and then they fly north or fly at least up to the high desert, places like Mourning Valley, to nest along a stream with cottonwood trees, preferably. So that's what they're looking for to nest in. But some of them are now nesting, or at least attempting to nest, in the Coachella Valley at some of the golf courses and places like Sunnylands, where you have permanent water, where you have large trees, where you might even have cottonwood trees and willows, which they really like. So watch for them any time of year, but especially in the winter, and they're always a treat to see. This is the male. I don't have a picture of the female here, but she is kind of like the Say's Phoebe. She has a shorter tail than the Say's Phoebe, and instead of having this kind of burnt orange here, she has kind of a peachy color in what we call the vent area here. So she can easily be mistaken for a Say's Phoebe. So check twice, especially if there's a male Vermilion Flycatcher around. If you ever get a chance to come on one of our Sunnylands bird walks, either on the estate or sometimes in the gardens, if we start those up in the fall, those are places to see the Vermilion Flycatcher. Another larger flycatcher that's here now, they've just arrived for the summer, is the Western Kingbird. They're almost twice the size of that Vermilion Flycatcher I just showed you. They've got a yellowish, light yellow belly, at least the lower half, and then a black tail with white on the edges. And they're quite noisy and vocal, and they love palm trees. So look for them perching on the telephone wires and the tops of your unpruned palm trees, chattering away and chasing other birds, chasing themselves. They're always making noise and very active. And they're just here in the summer. We do have crows in the valley, as well as ravens. So I want to talk about these two. Crows are somewhat of a recent arrival. When I moved to the valley in 1994, there were no crows to be seen in the Coachella Valley. And I tried. So it's all happened since about 1994, the invasion of the crows. They've discovered our valley. They moved into the Coachella Valley. They're now well established in a number of areas. Some places where you'll see them include the College of the Desert campus, Sunnylands and Rancho Mirage, Mission Lakes and Desert Hot Spring is kind of a hot spot for crows now. Palm Springs has a population you might see in some of the parks like Ruth Hardy Park. So they're going to be near people, and they're going to be near parks. They like the human landscape. They don't like the desert landscape. So that's one clue that you're seeing a crow, is looking at the habitat that surrounds it. Another clue is crows are a little bit smaller than ravens, but that's always hard to judge unless they're side by side, but they are smaller. They do flap a lot more, and that's one of the best ways for me to tell them apart, just by watching them fly. Ravens will soar on flat wings, like this one's doing, just occasionally giving a short flap, but crows are always doing very deep flaps and often flapping. Crows are also very social. They occur in flocks called murders. So you'll usually see a number of crows together. So that's another clue, it's a crow. Ravens are happy by themselves or in pairs, and they only group up usually in the fall. So they do break that rule in the fall, but the rest of the year, ravens tend to be in singles or pairs, or maybe 3 at the most. Whereas crows are almost always in flocks, very social and very loud. Probably the best way to tell them apart, though, is the voice. The raven has a deeper croaking, something like that. And the crow has that higher pitch caw, caw, so you can hear that nasalness in the crow's call. So if you wait for them to say something, then that's going to clinch whether it's a crow or a raven. So anyway, we do have both. So it's time for you to learn the difference and practice next time you see a large blackbird flying by. All the 6 or even 7 species of swallow pass through the valley during migration, but a couple of them stick around and spend the summer with us. And one of these is the cliff swallow. So these are the swallows that build their mud nests underneath bridges and overpasses on the freeway, and they'll attach these mud nests to the side of the wall there and have a side entrance. So there's a roof over the nest. If this was a barn swallow nest, and they don't typically nest in the Coachella Valley, but they do nest other places, they make a mud nest, but it's more like a cup with an open top. But cliff swallows have this round nest with a roof and a side entrance. So that tells you it's a cliff swallow. These are the swallows that you've heard about that return to Capistrano every year, or at least they used to. Sometimes they nest under your eaves of your home. And if that happens, consider yourself lucky. I've been waiting for them to choose my house all these years, and they haven't, but I wish they would. But they're great to have around because they eat bugs, nothing but bugs. So they fly around your yard and keep your yard and your area bug-free all summer long. And they nest in these colonies. It is illegal, by the way, to disturb any nest of any bird while it's active. So if it has eggs or chicks or adults in the nest, using the nest, it is unlawful to destroy or remove those nests. One of the most common year-round birds in our backyards in the desert is the verdin. But it's often overlooked because it's so small, it's bigger than a mouse. It's mouse-colored too, kind of grayish, and has a yellowish head. Now, this is a beautiful photo by Steve Myers, but most of the time you see a verdin, they don't look this bright. But they do have a little bit of yellowish in the head and even a little bit of chestnut on the bend of the wing there. And they'll make these stick nests, kind of like the cliff swallows, but out of sticks with a side entrance. And you'll see these nests, they're about the size of a large grapefruit in trees, maybe in your own backyard. And that's the work of the male verdin. He'll make 3 or 4 nests in a year, and the female will choose the best one to lay her eggs in. And the other nests then become hangouts for the male, kind of like a bachelor pad. The Bewick wren is another common year-round resident of most backyards. They're small and brown like most wrens with a little tail that sticks up. And the key field mark on the Bewick wren to tell you it's a Bewick is this white line or supercilium over the eye. So look for that white, and that'll clinch the identification. If you put up a typical birdhouse that you might have purchased at a local store just for fun, this is the most likely occupant that will move in. If you want to attract birds to your yard, putting up birdhouses can help, but remember, not a lot of birds actually nest in cavities, but a few of them do. The Bewick wren is one of those cavity nesters, but it's also important that you put a birdhouse with the right size hole. So do a little bit of research first, or email me and I'll help you out. The cactus wren is another year-round resident of the desert in our yards. They're not as common as the Bewick wren unless you have a lot of cactus in your yard, which you might, because they are associated with cactus. So the more cactus you have in your yard or in the neighborhood, the more likely you are to have a cactus wren. They're the largest wrens in North America. They're quite colorful, with all kinds of stripes and spotting going on, and they're very noisy and kind of boisterous. So they let you know they're around. They kind of sound like a car trying to start. Chirp, 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 chirp. And they're also the state bird of Arizona. The ruby-crowned kinglet is a winter resident only, but quite common during the winter in our backyards, flitting around the trees, eating bugs. Easy to miss though, because they're really tiny. But you'll notice them because they're very active. They're always on the move and they're always flicking their wings. It's rare though to see the ruby crown that gives it its name. But occasionally when they get angry, they can flare this little crown up like this one is doing and show you the ruby. They've all departed by now. It's early May, so they all should be on their way to some high altitude fir forest in the High Sierra or the Cascade Mountains to nest. There was one seen at Sunnylands last week, but that was a late one that hasn't migrated yet. But they'll be back. They usually start arriving around Halloween like a lot of our snowbirds do. The black-tailed gnatcatcher is a year-round resident, and it's especially noticeable if you have Palo Verde trees or mesquite trees or creosote bushes in or near your yards. They do like the native desert vegetation, but they're particularly fond of Palo Verde trees. During the summer and the breeding season, the male has this distinctive black cap. He loses that in the winter though, and kind of looks like the female. So in the winter, it's kind of tricky to tell them apart. They're year-round residents. Now this gnatcatcher, the blue-gray, is not a year-round resident. It's only here in the winter. And it looks just like the black-tailed gnatcatcher, who loses his black cap in the winter and starts to look a lot like a blue-gray gnatcatcher. The trick is to see the underside of the tail, which is hard to see. Here you can see some of it, but in a blue-gray gnatcatcher, most of the underside of the tail is white. There's just a little bit of black there. On the underside of the black-tailed gnatcatcher, it's mostly black with some white scalloping near the tip here. But it's mostly solid black, at least 2/3 of it. So mostly black, some white, or mostly white with just a little bit of black on the sides differentiates the two in winter. By now, the blue-gray gnatcatchers should have departed the desert and headed up the slopes to nest in the pinyon juniper woodland. And so we're left with nothing but black-tailed gnatcatchers until late September. Same story with the western bluebird. They come down the slopes in the winter to spend the winter with us. And then about this time of year, or even a couple weeks ago, they'll start moving up the slopes to nest in a pine forest, like at the top of the Palm Springs Tramway, for example, or in any of the mountains throughout the western United States where there's pine trees. But like the vermilion flycatchers and a few other birds, some of them are starting to nest or attempting to nest in the Coachella Valley. So watch for some of them to stick around perhaps all summer. And if you do see them nesting or can document them nesting or see them in the middle of June or July, which is a real strong indicator that they're nesting, make sure you record those on eBird. That's going to be important data as populations of birds kind of shift their ranges to deal with climate change. But anyway, this is the western bluebird. The male's a beautiful blue color with orange on the front. The female is kind of a duller version of the male. She can be quite gray with just a little bit of blue. In the winter, along with the ruby-crowned kinglets that winter with us, also come a few hermit thrushes. True to their name, they're usually by themselves. They like to hide under the bushes and scratch around in the leaf litter, so you hardly ever notice them unless you happen to scare them up during the winter, raking leaves under a bush, perhaps. The hermit thrush. They nest up in mountain forests, like in the High Sierra or perhaps even at the top of the tramway there. And same with the robin. These birds also nest up in the pine forest throughout the western United States, and they winter with us, starting to arrive usually in October. Some years we have a lot of robins around. Other winters we don't have so many. So their numbers kind of fluctuate depending on the food supply and the climate and what's going on. But it's usually about the food. They eat a lot of berries. So when the California or desert fan palms are ripe with dates, the robins love that in particular. So they should be gone by now, and they'll be back in the fall. Northern mockingbirds, however, are year-round residents. They never leave. Almost every backyard has a pair, it seems. And they're very noisy. They mimic the sounds of other birds. They even mimic the sounds that they hear in the human landscape, like a garage door opener or a cat or a car alarm. Whatever they're hearing, they'll put it into their repertoire. And if you're ever wondering what the bird is that you hear singing in the middle of the night at 3 in the morning, the answer is northern mockingbird. So now you know the answer to that question. It's the only bird that's going to sing in the middle of the night around here. And why do they do it? That's just what they like to do. The males like to proclaim their territory 24 hours a day. They're very territorial during the breeding season. When they fly, they have white patches in the wing, which helps identify them. But otherwise, they're kind of a small to medium-sized bird, about the size of a robin, but a little trimmer, and the tail is a little bit longer. And they like to feed on berries and insects. This is a bad bird. It's a non-native species. It's an invasive species, which means not only is it non-native and not from here, it is causing problems with our environment and with the ecology of the area. And that is because the European starling, which was imported from Europe in the late 1800s to New York Central Park, is a cavity nester, and it's a very aggressive one. And so it will take over nests of our native birds, Bluebird, for example, or an Azure-throated flycatcher, or a Bewick's wren, anything that might nest in a hole. And it will kill the young, kill the eggs, ruin the eggs, scare out the adults, take over. And so the end result is we get more starlings and fewer of our native species when starlings move into town. So if you've got a lot of starlings in your backyard, we've got a problem. And so you might want to contact me and we can talk about, how to fix that problem. One of the best ways is to plant native plants, because starlings don't like native plants. They like non-native plants. So that's one way to discourage them. Cedar waxwings arrive in the fall, usually in late September, early October, and they spend the winter with us. They're a true snowbird. A group of waxwings is called a museum, and they usually are in groups. They're very social. It's rare to see just one or two. You almost always see 10 or 11 or 12 or sometimes 30 or 40. They eat berries. They like pyracantha a lot. They'll feast on some of those dates from the desert fan palm I was talking about, Washingtonia filifera. And to me, this is the first sign that I've made it through another summer here in the desert, is when this first cedar waxwing arrives. When I hear their quavering whistle, it usually, like I said, in late September or the first week of October, I know we've made it through another summer. And we've got 6 months of absolutely beautiful weather to look forward to. So this is a special bird to me, the cedar waxwing. This time of year, they've left the desert. There's still a couple of them lingering around, but they should be gone by mid-May. And they're going to head north to cooler climates, maybe up in the Pacific Northwest to nest. Beautiful bird, though. Another bird with a crest that mostly winters here in the desert, like the waxwing, is the Phainopepla, which in Greek means shiny cloak. It's one of the only birds whose scientific name and common name are one and the same, Phainopepla. This is the male on the right, which has a shiny black robe or cloak. And this is the female on the left, who's more of an ashy gray color. They both have the crest, they both have the red eye, and they both have, although it shows up in the male more, kind of white patches in the wings. And they both feed on mistletoe berries, which are poisonous to most animals, but not to Phainopeplas. So they're very unusual birds in a number of ways. Some of them have more of an east-west migration as opposed to north-south. So they'll spend the winter in the desert and nest here and feed on mistletoe berries. And then they'll fly over to the coast, the mountains in Orange County, for example, nest there a second time in 1 year, feeding mostly on insects, and then come back to the desert in the winter. So they got a pretty nice life. They spend the summers at the beach area, winters here in the desert, and they nest and raise young in both places and even change their diet. Quite amazing. And it's been a good winter for Phainopepla, by the way. A lot of you have reported seeing them to me and to eBird. Warblers are moving through right now on their way north. The orange-crowned warbler, though, besides migrating through our backyards, also winters here in small numbers. So it's one of only 2 warblers that actually sticks around for the winter. They're very kind of a dull, dingy yellow color. And the orange crown that they're named for is rarely visible, so forget about it. They look almost like a lesser goldfinch when you see them. The most common wintering warbler in our backyards is the yellow-rumped warbler. And about this time of year, they've got their summer colors, and they look more like this one. In the winter, they kind of look brownish, more like a sparrow. But in any plumage, they've always got what people call the yellow rump. Now the rump's actually here. So actually the rump is actually black, not yellow. These feathers are actually the upper tail coverts. But yellow upper tail covered warbler doesn't really roll off the tongue, and that's why they call it the yellow-rumped warbler, because it kind of looks like the rump, but it's not. I'm getting technical here. But anyway, they're good to have around. They eat bugs. They spend the entire winter with us. They're super common, and there's lots of them moving through right now, heading north up to the High Sierra to nest. Now, the other warblers don't winter with us, and they just pass through in the spring, April and May right now, or sometimes in the fall. And one of those that's passing through right now as we speak is the Wilson's warbler. The male is a beautiful bright yellow with a black cap. So watch for them today and tomorrow in your yard or in the trees, heading north. All of these small birds, by the way, migrate at night, and they use the stars and magnetic fields for navigation at night. And so during the day, they rest in our backyards and refuel and gain their strength for the next 100 miles or so that they're going to fly after a couple nights pass. I'm just looking out my window now. I just see a white-winged dove that just showed up at my feeders. That's kind of neat. Western tanagers are also passing through right now. A week or two ago, there was a big wave of them just before we had that little mini heat wave. We saw a couple dozen of these in one day. And so anyway, they're passing through, they're heading to the Sierras, they're heading to pine forests, they're heading to the top of the tram in the Mount San Jacinto State Park, and that's where they're gonna nest. But watch for them showing up at your bird baths. They don't eat seeds, so they're not gonna—
Hi, Richard, it's Aaron, how are you?
Good, how are you?
But
Oh, busy.
Your bird baths.
Quite a few presentations and meetings today.
Oh, well, that's what you're supposed to be doing. That's why I get paid all the big
Hey,
bucks.
Aaron, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Aaron, can you hear me?
Calling back.
There we go. Put an end to that. This is the Abert's towhee, and he is going to be seen mostly on the ground. It's a year-round resident. It's a member of the Sparrow family. Note the black in his face, which helps differentiate it from the California towhee. which actually doesn't really occur in the desert floor, but does occur up the slopes a little bit. But one of the easier places to see this is the living desert, or even in my backyard here, I have a pair. They're only found in the Coachella and Imperial Valleys in California, and that's it. So it's one of our local specialties. So if you have birdwatcher friends from out of town who are only here for a short stay, this is one of those birds you definitely want to show them, because unless they're from Green Valley, Arizona, they're not going to have this bird wherever they come from. Ebert's towhee. White-crowned sparrows are super abundant throughout the winter. And the last one usually leaves right around the 1st of May. And here we are at May 4th today. And so most of them should be gone. But they'll be back in September. We'll see the first ones, and they'll be one of the most common birds at our bird feeders throughout the winter, starting in October. White-crowned sparrow. Dark-eyed juncos winter here as well, but in much smaller numbers. Some winters we have a number of them. Other winters we hardly see any at all. But it's a bird to watch out for. You can see the black hood that is very distinctive. And they're going to head up the slopes and nest in pine forests, just like a lot of these other species during the summer. So watch for them in the winter, mixed in with the white-crowned sparrows. Now, black-headed grosbeaks are passing through this week and last week and the week before. So April and May are the months to watch for them at your feeder. If you put out black oil sunflower seed, which I've been going through a lot of these past few weeks, I'm up at 5:30 every morning filling the feeders for these grosbeaks. I've got a single pair that's still hanging around today. I just saw them a minute ago. But one day, it was about 10 days ago, I had 21 black-headed grosbeaks at my feeder at one time. It was just amazing. So this is the time to watch for them. Soon they'll all have passed through, and they're all heading to some mid-elevation area where there's a lot of oak trees, which is what they want to nest in. So they might go up to Idlewild, or they might go up to the foothills of the Sierras, or anywhere where they can find a lot of oaks. They winter down in places like Belize and Guatemala and Central America, southern Mexico. Another bird some of you have reported seeing, and I've seen a couple myself in the last couple of weeks, is the Lazuli or Lazuli Bunting, however you want to say it. This is a beautiful male. And they will sometimes come to your seed feeders. They do eat seeds, but you're more likely to see them at your bird bath. So if you have a bird bath that's nice and shallow, maybe with a little bit of a slow drip added to it, that's what they're looking for. And one morning you'll wake up in April or early May, and you'll see this beautiful blue bird out there taking a bath. Lazuli Bunting. They winter down in southern Mexico and some of the places I just mentioned, and they're headed north of here, and they're going to spread themselves out throughout the western United States, nesting along some stream somewhere. Locally, they nest up near Garner Valley and many points north of there, all the way to Canada. The gray-tailed grackle is a year-round resident now, and kind of like the crow, they've invaded our valley in the past few decades, and now they're here to stay, and they're continuing their invasion and pushing north. Now you'll see them up in the Bay Area and even further than that. But I get a lot of questions about this bird because they're not quite right for a crow or a raven, and they're too big for a blackbird. And so people kind of forget that there's an in-between bird, and it's called a grackle. They're extremely noisy and obnoxious and make a variety of crazy sounds. They love palm trees. They love lawns, you know, so you're going to see them in a lot of the golf course areas around the valley. I see them at the College of the Desert near the driving range on occasion. The male is this bird here you see. He's got a really long tail. He's glossy black. The female's tail is not so long, and she's more of a warm brown color, not this glossy black of the male. So if it's too big for a blackbird and not right for a crow or raven, it's going to be a grackle. If you go to Houston, Texas, and anywhere east of there, you'll see the boat tailed grackle, which looks almost identical. The two species come together right around Houston, Texas. So a little smaller than that grackle then is the Brewer's Blackbird. A much shorter tail. It's got the kind of white or yellow around the eye, which the grackle has, but it's just more of a blackbird, typical blackbird size. They're mostly here in the winter, although a few of them may linger throughout the summer. And mixed in with the blackbirds and sometimes the grackles will be brown-headed cowbirds, especially noticeable this time of year in the spring. It's never a good sign when there's a lot of cowbirds around because these birds are nest parasites and the females will lay their eggs in other birds' nests. I've been noticing them, a pair of them at my feeders, and they always show up in April and May because they're lurking and stalking some of these nesting birds and trying to find out where their nests are so they can drop off an egg in them and not have to raise it. The host species will end up raising the young of the cowbird, and their own young almost always die or are shoved out of the nest. So cowbird numbers increase while native species decrease. That's why it's never a good sign when there's a lot of cowbirds in an area. They are native to our area, but they're not really native to the desert itself. But because we've transformed the desert into something very undesert-like with all the turf grass you see and non-native vegetation, we've created accidentally a kind of a cowbird paradise. And so we've played a definite role in increasing their numbers here in the Coachella Valley at the expense of many of our native species. Another cowbird that occasionally shows up is the bronze cowbird. It comes up from Mexico. Notice it doesn't have the brown head, it's all black, and it has a red eye, which is very unique. In fact, it used to be called the red-eyed cowbird. There was one in the parking lot of Albertsons in La Quinta a few years ago that spent quite a few months there. So keep checking your blackbird flocks, and if you find one with a red eye, report it to ebird.org or send me an email. Hooded orioles have arrived, and they're going to nest in our unpruned palm trees. So make sure you don't prune your palms between March 1st and September 1st to avoid accidentally cutting out the nests of these beautiful birds. So they do spend the summer with us, and they're specifically associated with palm trees. Hooded oriole. The Bullock's oriole is also passing through this week. In April and May, they pass through. They don't usually nest in the valley, although a few of them might. So if you do see one in June or July or August, take special note and report it to ebird.org, because that could be a significant sighting and more proof that they are actually nesting here in the Coachella Valley. But most of them are passing through right now. They'll stop by your bird baths or your oriole feeders, which have the same mix of sugar water that your hummingbird feeders do, 4-to-1 or 3-to-1. And they're heading north, and they're going to nest usually in cottonwoods or willows along a stream somewhere. Their favorite tree is a Fremont cottonwood. The Scott's oriole is mostly with us in the winter. They nest in the high desert at Joshua Tree National Park, wherever there are yuccas. They'll nest up in pinyon pines. So they like the kind of the mid-elevation areas where yuccas occur. And then in the winter, many of them go down to Mexico, but some of them winter here in the Coachella Valley. And so I'll have a couple of these usually at my oriole feeder throughout the winter in Palm Desert. Scott's oriole. House finch, probably the most common bird in the Coachella Valley year-round. Male on the left, female on the right. This is the bird that has been very susceptible to bacteria infection that some of you in the Desert Cities Bird Club have read about.
You came on.
And it's another reason we want to make sure we keep our feeders.
Wolf, like, jumped up. It was really weird.
And watch out for any sign of disease in these birds. Usually you'll see some problem around the eyes, kind of a puffiness around the eye, or the bird will get very lethargic and won't move away from you. And if that happens, again, you can report that to ebird.org. But keep those feeders clean and rake up any of the bird droppings as frequently as you can underneath so they don't get mixed in with the seed. And that will help with the problem. Lesser goldfinch, another member of the finch family that's here year-round, although their numbers fluctuate throughout the year. So don't panic if you've suddenly seen a drop in numbers of your goldfinches, because at certain times of the year they do disperse, they do move to other areas, they do go and nest, and so their numbers can fluctuate almost wildly sometimes. But then they'll come back. They feed on thistle seed, or Niger, it's also called. It's very expensive. If you want the best deal in the valley, you got to go to the Desert Feed Bag in Indio and get a 50-pound bag. That's where you'll get the best price. That's at Golf Center Parkway exit. This is the male with the black cap and the bright yellow, and then the females doesn't have the black cap. She's kind of more of a dull yellow, not quite as bright as the male. Lesser goldfinches. They come in flocks called charms. And every now and then, mixed in with the lesser goldfinch charm, will be a Lawrence goldfinch or two. So they're very irregular, but if you keep watching your goldfinch flocks, eventually you'll be rewarded with the sighting of a Lawrence's goldfinch. They're only yellow in certain places on their body, kind of patchy, and it's more of a golden yellow. And then it looks like he's dipped his face in black paint here. So very unique and beautiful goldfinch that is irregular and shows up occasionally in the desert. If you go up to Morongo Valley, especially if you spend some time in Covington Park, which is adjacent to the Big Morongo Canyon Preserve. It's open now, by the way. That's where you can find Lawrence's goldfinches almost on a year-round basis nesting. And that is the end of the show. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to see if there's any questions that have come about.
Thank you so much, Kurt. That's great. So yeah, if you want to, it looks like there's some questions in the Q&A. And then a couple people are asking to have their hand up. So if you want to go ahead and drive through that, go for it.
Okay, let's see if I can find your Q&A. Here it is. Okay, I'll just roll through these. Why are hummingbirds always chasing each other? Well, the males are very aggressive and like to chase other males away in particular, especially during the breeding season. And they also like to guard their flowers or their hummingbird feeders. So they don't want other hummingbirds, even the females, to feed. And so they'll try to chase all the other ones away and act like a bully. Are these photos taken yourself? No, most of them were taken by Steve Myers of Moreno Valley. Good friend of mine. I take a few photos, but not very many. I'm usually just watching the birds. Say's Phoebe, a small bird like a Say's Phoebe usually can, if it gets to its first year, which is always the toughest for any bird, then a Say's Phoebe can maybe live 3 or 4 or 5 years if they're lucky. And so they might return to the same nesting spot for a few years in a row in your yard. So it probably is the same bird. But after 4 or 5 years, then it's probably going to be a different bird. Let's see, bird feeders. What do I recommend to feed birds if you don't want to mess on the ground? Yeah, I don't want to mess on the ground either. So I try to limit the amount of seed I put out each day, kind of ration it, and I don't fill the feeders all the way up. So I just put little handfuls here and little handfuls there to keep the birds going throughout the day. But my goal is by the end of the day that all the seed's going to be eaten, so there's no accumulation beneath the feeders, which could attract rats, I suppose, or lead to other problems like the seed mixing with the bird feces, which can lead to disease spread. The other thing you can do is rotate your feeding. Maybe feed on Mondays and take a day off, and then feed on Wednesdays. Or like in my yard, I've got 3 feeding areas at 3 different sides of the house. So like on Mondays, I'll put seed in one of those areas. On Tuesday, I'll go to the next, Wednesday, the third, and then every 3 days I rotate back to the start. And that way the seed doesn't build up so much at any one spot. And the birds always have something to eat, and it kind of keeps them moving around a little bit too. Is there a bird rescue place here? The only place that you can really take an injured or sick bird is the Coachella Valley Wild Bird Center. So write that down. It's called the Coachella Valley Wild Bird Center. The phone number is 760-347-2647. That's 760-347-2647. And you're going to talk to Linda York. Tell her Kurt sent you. And she's there in the morning. So always call early between, say, 8 and 11:30. And you'll usually get Linda there at any day of the week. And she can answer your questions or tell you what to do with a sick or an injured bird. They always appreciate a donation if you're going to bring a bird in, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of money, you know, to care for these birds. But anyway, Coachella Valley Wild Bird Center, it's the same exit on the freeway where the Desert Feed Bag is. So when you're going to buy your 50-pound bags of thistle at Desert Feed Bag, you can also stop by the Coachella Valley Wild Bird Center, which is just down the road. That's the Golf Center Parkway exit. If you call or take a bird to the living desert, they're very likely to just put it down. They don't really want to spend time trying to rehab birds, or they'll ship it over to Linda anyway. So just do everybody a favor and call Linda instead. Don't go to the living desert for that. The best type of bird feeders, I could talk all day on that. I may do another talk on that topic later, but whatever kind you like. There's tube feeders and there's platform feeders. Sometimes I just throw the seed right on the ground, little handfuls here and there under the bushes, make them kind of work for it, because a lot of birds like to scratch around on the ground. So kind of mix it up, or email me on the side and we can talk more about bird feeders and whatnot. I've got a whole variety of them. Why aren't hummingbirds afraid of us? Well, they are, but they have the ability to zoom away from us at top speed, right? 0 to 60 in, half a second. So they're probably more likely to allow us to get close to them because they know they can get away if we did try to reach out and grab them. But on the other hand, if they get used to you, they can be quite tamed. You can tame them to some point, and they can even sit on your finger like they do on my feeders. I'll stick my finger out there real quietly, and they'll just land right on it because they're just used to me. Plants in the garden to attract birds. Again, I'm going to do another talk on that later for a whole hour. But for now, I'll just say, again, native plants. Stick to the native plants. Find out what's native to your area. And you can email me on the side, and I'll help you figure that out. Or I can also come to your yard, and I'll be happy to give you suggestions. But plant things that are native, plant things that will bloom throughout the year, plant things that you like to see. So take notes when you're walking around the neighborhood and try to find out the names of different plants that you like, and then go track those plants down. Do nighthawks make a buzzing sound as they dive for insects? Our nighthawks are almost always silent, unlike the common nighthawks. If you're from, somewhere else, maybe you grew up back east and you're used to hearing the distinctive call of the common nighthawk. It kind of goes ping, ping, ping. Our nighthawks don't do that. They don't make a sound. So they're mostly silent. How do we discourage pesky English sparrows? Any of those non-native birds, again, planting native plants is the best way to start to discourage them because the non-native birds prefer non-native plants. So the more you transform your yard into something more desert friendly, the fewer non-native birds you're going to have. That's one thing you can do. My email is in the chat. So if you guys can figure out how to open the chat and look at the first thing there, you should find my email. How do we discourage roadrunners from patrolling our bird feeders? I don't know. They're part of the deal. If you feed birds, you're going to also feed birds that eat birds. In terms of discouraging roadrunners, I say don't feed them directly. if you don't want them to come back every day. If you do, I don't encourage you to feed roadrunners at all, but you definitely shouldn't feed them hamburger balls like some people do. It's really bad for them. So don't do that. And if you want to feed them anything, feed them whole mice, which you can buy at the pet store, already frozen. You can thaw them out and put them on a rock, and that would be good for the roadrunner to eat. If that isn't something you want to do, you could put a few mealworms, freeze-dried mealworms on a rock, and that's not going to hurt them to eat a few of those. Otherwise, just don't feed them at all. And if you see them and don't like them, I guess just shoo them away from your yard and they'll get the picture. Back to this bird seed mix. I see a question on that. I use a regular seed mix for a lot of birds like sparrows. I use the black oil sunflower seed. I buy in 40-pound bags, which the grosbeaks and some of those types of birds enjoy. And then I buy the thistle seeds. So those are the main 3 seeds that I invest in: a regular mix, black oil sunflower seed, and thistle seed. And I put out a little bit of each every day, at least somewhere in the yard, to keep all the birds happy. How do you get hummingbirds to build their nests in your yard? Well, you know, again, plant native plants, especially penstemons, and chuparosa is probably the #1 plant to encourage hummingbirds to be in your yard. And once they're hanging around their yard, then at least a couple of them are going to nest. But most of them are going to spread out and nest throughout the neighborhood. So you're never going to have lots of hummingbirds nesting in one yard, because they do have their territories to sort out. So an average yard might be able to have 2 or 3 hummingbird nests at the most, I would say. Can I talk about ducklings in the pool? Well, you know, ducks like water, and they do go into pools, and you can email me on the side if you have a more specific question, like how to get rid of them. I mean, I guess build a fence around your yard if you must, or I don't know, or just let them swim around. Will this presentation be on YouTube? It'll be on the Rancho Mirage Library website for at least a month, or probably 2, and then they'll take it down after that. How do you discourage ducks from eating seeds for the sparrows? Again, don't let the seed pile up on the ground, because that's where ducks feed. So maybe go to more of a platform feeder, or a feeder that doesn't allow the seed to spill onto the ground, or just put less seed in your feeder so it doesn't build up on the ground. A good bird book for the area. Well, I do recommend this handy little guide. So email me and I'll send you one. They're $8, but email me for details on that. And if you want something fancier than that, then I would recommend the National Geographic Field Guide to Birds of North America by John Dunn. So National Geographic Field Guide to Birds of North America by Dunn. Let's see. So I think that's most of the questions I saw.
It looks like a couple people had their hand up. So let's see. Is Anne Marie? Are you still?
Unmute? Can we unmute and just have them ask? Or how about we unmute everybody, or I'll give them the option to? I don't know. That way I won't miss anybody.
I'm not sure that I can unmute everyone.
I'm putting my email in the chat again.
All right. So anybody who has had their put up the raise hand, I've now unmuted. So feel free to ask a question.
Yeah, hear from you. I'm putting the title of the book I just mentioned to you in the chat. Anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question I didn't get to?
Denise,
Hi.
Anne Marie. Oh, there's somebody.
Hi, Kurt.
Hi,
I just wanted to note that we put noodle cadoodles in the swimming pool. It helps keeps the ducks away.
Oh, they don't like those noodles floating around?
Nope. So
Okay,
put about 4 of them in your pool and it helps.
that's a good tip. Just leave them floating around in there. Don't take them out.
Yep.
Okay, I like that. I'll remember that. I'm putting Linda York's phone number in the chat now, Coachella Valley Wild Bird Center. That's in Indio, Golf Center Parkway exit.
Looks like a couple more typed in questions.
Where am I looking for those?
Andrea asked, we have a sparrow-sized bird with a light orange cap on his head. What type is this?
A sparrow-sized bird with a light orange cap on its head. It sounds like a male house finch, which they're not always red. They can vary anywhere from yellow to orange to red. It's probably one of those in-between ones. Male house finch.
Hello?
Yeah,
Hi.
I hear you.
I wanted to ask a question about kestrel boxes. Is there, do
Okay.
you have plans for those, or, and also maybe bat boxes?
Yeah, I've got both in my yard. I would say just go on, if you're interested in a kestrel box, go online. And there's
You
tons of
recommend, there's a
information.
lot.
What?
There kind of a lot of those boxes, and I just wondered, do you like one better?
Oh, I don't have like a go-to one.
Okay.
But recently I put up a screech owl box up in Idlewild, which also is a kestrel box. So apparently the hole for a kestrel is the same size hole that a screech owl prefers. So if you were to go even to like Amazon.com or just Google screech owl / kestrel box, you'll probably find the exact one that I found. I paid about, they're not cheap. I paid about $70 for one to be sent to me. And some
Yeah,
of
I
them,
guess that's why I was looking for plans.
yeah, you can find plants. Just the important thing is the size of the hole. So just do a little bit of research to make sure you've got that diameter correct.
Okay, thank you.
But you can email me on the side and we can talk more about that if you want.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I came in a little bit late, so I'm wondering, did you talk about what quail we have here?
Yeah, that was the first slide, so you missed it.
Oh,
No, it's the Gambel's quail.
okay,
Gambels, Gambel's quail.
okay, great.
And then a little further up the slope, we have California quail, and then further up in Garner Valley, Idlewild, we have the mountain quail.
Looks like Mary had a question. Which native birds are the best pollinators and good for seed dispersal?
Well, pollinators and birds, you first you got to think of hummingbirds. So hummingbirds are great at that. They're the best around here. Otherwise, a lot of the insects take care of that business. Other birds do a little bit of pollinating almost by accident. Some of the warblers and anything that's kind of feeding on a flower, which aren't too many birds, except for hummingbirds. And then what was the other question?
It was good for seed dispersal. Native birds.
Well, again, any of the berry-eating birds are going to hopefully help disperse some of those seeds in their droppings. The one that comes to mind, though, is the Phainopepla. They eat mistletoe berries, and they're the ones responsible for spreading mistletoe from plant to plant in their droppings.
If you answered this one, I may have missed it, but someone asked, they said, I put a little bleach in my fountain where birds like to drink and bathe. I'm assuming for cleaning. Will the bleach harm them?
I wouldn't leave the bleach in there. So you can use a few drops of bleach when you're cleaning them, but then I would rinse it out thoroughly before you add, the fresh water to it. I wouldn't leave the bleach in there. No.
And
but a couple drops probably isn't gonna kill anything either. I mean, harm them, but use the bleach for cleaning and then freshen it up with regular water.
Susan asks, how long will the migrating warblers hang out? Is it based on temperatures reaching a certain point?
Yeah, temperatures play a role, but there's just a time frame. They're in a hurry right now to go north. So usually the warblers are going to pass through between mid-April and mid-May. So we're kind of getting closer to the end of their window. With each passing day in May now, you know, we're getting closer to not seeing any more warblers coming through. So numbers might start to decrease, but we'll still see them for maybe a couple more weeks.
All right. And then another Susan is curious. We have a crow that is always being chased by a white and gray bird. Not sure if I saw it in your lecture. Do you know what that might be?
White and gray and a crow. I'm guessing it's here in the desert. Oh, that's got to be a mockingbird. Yeah, northern mockingbird. They're gray and they have white wing patches, very conspicuous in flight, and they're super aggressive, and they love to chase cats and crows and people and whatever's getting in their way.
All right. Well, I've got one last question for you, Kurt, and this is from me actually. We had a hummingbird make a nest on a hook, like a hanging hook for a hanging basket. And it was amazing to see that it could even make a nest on, you know, it was maybe half an inch, not even half an inch. And then sadly, windstorm came along, we think, and it had 2 babies in it, and we couldn't find the babies. The nest was sort of destroyed. Is that common that they'll pick those very small places like that?
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, it happens. The wind takes its toll. And the hummingbirds use spider webs to make their nests, which have kind of a stickiness to them to begin with. And that's how they're able to get away with that and kind of stick their nest on just the smallest little pedestal. So they're relying sort of on the stickiness of the webs to keep it attached. And sometimes the wind, you know, blows them off. If that ever happens and you catch it in time, you know, you can kind of put the nest back or build your own little, you know, you got to MacGyver something really quick, but if you can build your own little platform or something that's a little more stable, you could stick the nest back in there with the babies, and the parents will come back if you do it quick enough. Or if you are watching hummingbirds nesting in your yard and you think that the situation is precarious or the next windstorm might cause damage, maybe you can do some preventative stuff by shoring it up in some way, maybe building a little barrier against the wind to prevent the wind from doing just that. But,
okay, great, thanks. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Several questions on will it be available? Yes, by tomorrow we'll have the YouTube, on our YouTube channel, we will have a recording up of today's presentation. And make sure that if you're not already, you sign up for the Library and Observatory's email list. We will send out all of our upcoming programs. And thanks again for joining us. Kurt, I'll give you the last word today.
Again, I'll just say thank you as well for everybody who attended, and thank you for supporting the Rancho Mirage Library who put this on. And please email me with all your follow-up questions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.